the last seat. Mine has been sold 4 or 5 times. Nobody get near it. Just
hey, that's my seat.
No, it's not. I want you to join me, even though you've already done it, kids. Join me in looking at your cell phone and your smartphone and being sure it's going to shut up. Now, before you do that, I want to show you mine. Are you ready?
Retro.
And, hold on. 17 years ago, yeah. Just fine. But when it gets tired now, it turns itself off after But you know, it's family now. You've made such a wise decision to come here tonight. Bill Zarchi and I have known each other through the Stage Mission program. And if you don't know that program, just know that it's a senior repertory theater and full classes and all kinds of stuff. But you have to be over 55 to join. How do you like it? I like it. When you're younger than that, too bad. Go someplace else.
Just wait.
And you can look this up online, of course, and you'll see that there are vast offerings of classes. 80-year-olds taking tap dancing. It's something for everyone, and you might like to look it up. It's a great pleasure to have had Bill in some of my classes. When Hannibal, by the way, when Hannibal left Carthage, he took with him, as you know, whole 3,000 warriors, and he took a whole bunch of elephants in order, get this, to cross the Alps in the winter. The winter. But he traveled light compared to Bill. Bill has to schlep or have schlepped enormous quantities of equipment. And it's not small and tiny stuff. It's big, beefy stuff. It's got to carry it all over the world and back. He also has to hire local guys to do the work, wrangle them, to get them there on time, tell them what it's about. He's got to manage and referee sometimes his crew members, and their little spats go on. And he's got to go every place in the known and unknown world in order to drink enormous quantities of bad coffee and stale pastries. It's quite a life. You can enjoy it. You'll have some pastries yourself later. Thank you for coming.
The legendary Mary Gay Ducey.
All right, Mary!
Anansi the spider is well known in African folklore as a trickster and a maker of mischief. One day, one very hot day, Anansi the spider went walking through the forest until he came to a clearing. And in the middle of the clearing was a path. And in the middle of the path was an unusual object. Anansi walked right up to it and looked at it. And then he thought for a minute and said, "Isn't that a strange moss-covered rock? Kapow!" Anansi was knocked over onto his back, unconscious. 1 hour later, he woke up, dazed and confused, head spinning, trying to figure out what happened. Anansi looked at the unusual object and he said, "What was that all about? I just said, isn't that a strange moss-covered rock? Kapow! Again, knocked onto his back, unconscious. 1 hour later, he woke up. He got back up on all of his feet. And he said, "I see what's happening here. Every time I say, isn't that a I get knocked unconscious. I know how to use this to my advantage." So Anansi the spider went walking through the forest until he came to the home of Lion. Now Lion was sitting on his front porch surrounded by yams, piles and piles of sweet golden yams. Anansi loved yams, but he was much too lazy to dig them up himself. "Greetings, Lion. Isn't it a hot day today?" "Yes, Anansi, it is a very hot day." "Well, Lion, perhaps we could go for a walk in the forest and catch the cool breezes." "Yes, Anansi, that's a very good idea." So Lion and Anansi the spider went walking through the forest, and Anansi guided where they went. And soon they came to the clearing, and in the middle of the clearing was a path. And in the middle of the path was the unusual object. Anansi walked right up to it. Lion stood there next to him. Lion looked down and he said, "Isn't that a strange moss-covered rock?" Kapow! Lion was knocked over onto his back, unconscious. Anansi went running off to Lion's house and grabbed as many yams as he could and stole them and took them to his own house and then went back to Lion's and back and forth until he took all of Lion's yams. 1 hour later, Lion woke up, dazed and confused, head spinning, and he walked slowly home. And when he got there, he saw that all of his precious yams were gone. And Lion was very sad. Now Anansi was very happy. And he decided to keep pulling this trick. And he went walking through the forest until he came to the home of Elephant. "Greetings, Elephant. It is a very hot day today." "Yes, Anansi, it's a very hot day." "Well, Elephant, perhaps we could go for a walk in the forest and catch the cool breezes." "Yes, Anansi, let us do that. I'm so very, very hot." So Elephant and Anansi the spider went walking through the forest until they came to the clearing. And in the middle of the clearing was a path, and in the middle of the path was the unusual object. Anansi walked right up to it, and Elephant walked right up next to him. And Elephant looked down and said, "Isn't that a strange moss-covered rock?" Kapow! Boom! The forest shook as Elephant was knocked onto his back, completely unconscious. Anansi went running off to Elephant's house because what he had seen there were stacks and stacks of beautiful, sweet, yellow bananas. And Anansi loved bananas, but he was much too lazy to pick them himself. He stole as many of Elephant's bananas as he could, and he ran to his own house and then back and forth until he'd taken all of Elephant's bananas. 1 hour later, Elephant woke up, dazed and confused, head spinning. And he walked slowly home. And when he got there, he saw that all of his beautiful bananas were gone. And Elephant was very sad. But Anansi was really revved up by now. "I'm going to pull this trick on all the animals of the forest." And he stole all the food from rhino and hippo and giraffe and zebra. And pretty soon he'd stolen all the food from all the animals in the forest. Except for one. Little bush deer was standing on the edge of the clearing when Anansi first saw the unusual object. And little bush deer saw Anansi bring Lion there and Elephant and all the other animals and saw him get them to say that thing, so they were knocked unconscious. And little bush deer said, "I believe this young man should get his comeuppance. I shall teach him a lesson." So little bush deer went deep into the forest where the coconut trees grow. And he climbed a coconut tree. And when he got to the top with his little hooves, he knocked a coconut down to the ground, and then another, and another, and another. And he climbed another tree, and he did the same thing until there were piles and piles of coconuts. And then he brought them home in a basket. He had to go back and forth a few times. He got all the coconuts onto his front porch. And then he sat down to wait. Pretty soon, Anansi the spider came walking through the forest. And he came to the home of little bush deer. Little bush deer was sitting on the porch of his house surrounded by coconuts. Anansi loved coconuts. He loved to eat the sweet coconut meat, and he loved to drink the coconut milk. But he was much too lazy to pick the coconuts himself. "Little bush deer, perhaps we could go for a walk in the forest and catch the cool breezes. It is a very hot day." "Yes, Anansi, it is a very hot day. Let us go." So little bush deer and Anansi the spider went walking through the forest until they came to the clearing, and in the middle of the clearing was a path, and in the middle of the path was the unusual object. Anansi walked right up to it. Little bush deer walked up next to him. Anansi looked down at the thing, then he looked at little bush deer. Little bush deer was looking at the sky, the hills, and the trees. "Don't you see that right in front of you?" "See what, Anansi?" "You know, you can see it. I know you can see it." "I don't know what you're talking about. See what?" "You can see it. You just don't want to say it." "Well, what is it you want me to say?" "You know." "That's what you want me to say? All right. You know. No, I don't want you to say you know. I want you to say, isn't that a strange moss-covered rock? Kapow! Anansi was knocked onto his back, unconscious. Little bush deer went running off to Anansi's home. And he summoned all the other animals of the forest, and he gave lion back his yams, and he gave elephant back his sweet bananas, and he returned all the food to rhino and hippo and giraffe and zebra. 1 hour later, Anansi woke up, dazed and confused, head spinning, and he walked slowly home. And when he got there, he saw that all the food that he'd stolen from all the animals in the forest was gone. And Anansi was very sad. But if you think he's learned his lesson, you've got another thing coming, because he's still out there playing mischief and playing tricks on others. Thank you. I said I'd do this without notes, but I just want to remember. That was the first story. I've been taking storytelling classes at Stagebridge for a couple of years, and that was the very first story that I told in class. And it was also, it was based on a book that our kids had when they were young. And I always loved the story, and it was also the second story that I told in class, and it was also the third story because I didn't figure out that my classmates were bringing in new stories each time, and I thought, oh, I'm working on this. But I didn't know what working on it meant, and so then there came the day when our teacher, Kirk Waller, said, I think you guys need to learn how to tell stories with a little bit of distraction. So he urged us to heckle each other ever so gently. And as a novice, I went out there and I asked an open-ended question. Has anyone ever heard of Anansi the spider? And one of my classmates went, yeah, about 1 million times. I haven't told it since then. I call Mom on my cell phone as my film crew sets up around me. I'm in Bill Clinton's office in New York. We're setting up for an interview with him. It's for the West Wing documentary. No, it's not about politics. It's about the culture of working in the White House. I want to sit in his seat, but I'm afraid if my tush touches the leather seat, that it'll set off some kind of Secret Service anti-groupie alarm, and armed agents with Uzis will come in there and take me away. Nevertheless, I try, but I can't bring myself to sit. Finally, I do. I'm in his chair. I'm sitting behind his desk. Tell Pop where I called you from, and tell him I'll see you both tomorrow. A few weeks earlier, our pooch, Sophie, our family dog, was in a really bad way. We knew the end was near. Her systems were breaking down. 13 was a lot of dog years. She could hardly move, and as she got off her bed, she messed herself, and she was so mortified and embarrassed that she staggered out the back door, and I watched in horror as she slipped down the 4 stairs to the yard and into the mud under the deck. I dove down after her and went into the mud myself. I was afraid. I knew there was an open hatchway that led to the crawl space under the house, and I was afraid that she was going to crawl into the house and die. As I squirmed through the mud, I grabbed her by her hind legs, and I pulled our 90-pound mutt out as she started to disappear from under the house. When I let go of her to close the hatch, she squirmed away from me and disappeared into the muck on the other end of the deck. Sometime later, she made her way back into the house. The following day, I had a funny feeling, and I went to check on her. She lay completely motionless on her bed, the light gone from her eyes. In the living room, the grandfather clock, the clock that my father had built for us, chimed 12. Now he was helpless in a hospital bed in Phoenix after a massive stroke, and Sophie was dead. Bill Clinton told us that he had ended his 2 terms as president more optimistic than he had started. He also told us that under French law, he and his political advisor, James Carville, were both eligible to run for president of France. Because Clinton was born in Arkansas and Carville in Louisiana, both parts of the Louisiana Purchase, former French colonies. Under the law, they could move to France, establish residency, and run for office. I don't think I'll do that, though, said Clinton. He said, I'm sure I take a lot of flack for my French accent. After the interview, which was his first major TV interview after leaving office, he hung around for a while to chat. I wanted to talk to him because I knew his family had recently lost their dog as well. And I wanted to make a connection. But the woman who had catered our film shoot had a lot to say to Clinton about George W. Bush. And I couldn't get a word in edgewise. The next day, I went to Phoenix, and I visited Pop in the hospital. My dad had always been a Renaissance man, talented artist, photographer, musician, teacher, author of over 30 books on crafts and hobbies in the outdoors. Kind of guy who could do or build or repair or explain anything. But now, nearly 90, about the same number of dog years as Sophie, he lay helpless in a hospital bed, fed by a tube, incontinent, his hearing impaired, barely able to move. I told him about the West Wing documentary. It's about the culture of working in the White House. We're interviewing people who are used to get hard-driving political questions, and we're saying, what's it like to go to work there every day? It's fascinating. We interviewed Bill Clinton in New York yesterday, and we're going to see Gerald Ford in Palm Springs tomorrow. He looked at me, despite everything, with a twinkle in his eye. Ford, huh? You know, they named a theater after him. I thought for a moment, you mean Ford's Theater where Lincoln was shot? And he smiled, happy that I'd gotten his corny joke. Dear President Clinton, I met you last week. I was the cameraman, the tall guy behind the director, during the interview you did for The West Wing in your office. I thoroughly enjoyed meeting you on that project, as well as Presidents Carter and Ford and Secretary Kissinger. I'm writing to offer my condolences on the death of your dog, Buddy. My family recently went through the same kind of loss. Our pooch, Sophie, died in March at age 13, and the house feels very empty without her. She was big and black, a boxer lab mix, scary looking, but meek as a lamb, and great with kids. My wife and I always walked Sophie to school with our 2 sons. Children we didn't know would come up to us on the street, greet Sophie by name, and exchange a scratch behind the ears for a wet down, ignoring us. She had a prodigious tongue and a thick, whip-like tail. Together they made for an intense licking and wagging experience, especially when she was happy, which was most of the time. We scattered Sophie's ashes at sunset at the dog park on San Francisco Bay, where she spent many happy hours. Then we spent the evening digging through old photos and movies of our family growing up with her. Laughing and spending time together helped our family heal the hurt of losing her. That's what I wish I had told you the day we met. I hope you're able to have some peace about losing Buddy. Remember the good times and the wonderful, unconditional love that only dogs and precious few humans practice regularly. If you do run for president of France, I wish you the best of luck. You can always work on your French accent. Best wishes, Bill Zarch. 2 days before the West Wing documentary aired on NBC, a big career boost for me, getting to shoot a network primetime documentary special. Very unusual for someone in my profession in this market. 2 days before the show aired, Pop passed away in Phoenix. I watched the show with my wife and kids and a couple of close friends. And I burst into tears when I saw my credit near the beginning of the show, Director of Photography, over a beautiful aerial shot of the White House that I actually didn't shoot. Pop didn't live long enough to see the show, but I was happy that at least I got to tell him about. 4 months later, 4.5 months later, I got a letter in the mail. Embossed presidential seal, William Jefferson Clinton at the top. Dear Bill, thank you for the kind letter you sent me after the filming of the West Wing documentary. I was so touched by it and regret that I was unable to respond sooner. I was sorry to learn about the loss of your dog, Sophie. While our family has a new puppy now, I still miss Buddy very much. He will always hold a special place in my heart, which, as a fellow dog lover, I know you understand. It was a great pleasure for me to participate in the West Wing special episode, and I'm grateful for all you did to make it such a success. I'm glad you took the time to write, and send you my best wishes. Sincerely, Bill Clinton. So much had happened since the day that we interviewed Clinton in his office in New York. The West Wing documentary won a Primetime Emmy for Outstanding Special Class Program, beating out an I Love Lucy special and an episode of Survivor. For myself, in a very profound way, I started to become more like my father. I'd always been very single-minded about my career as a cinematographer, but I started to diversify my activities and interests. New opportunities were opening for me in writing and teaching. A friend who had recently lost his father said, "You know, Bill, I find more of my dad in myself every day. So in a way, you have more of your father to look forward to, rather than less." And a cousin of mine who hadn't seen my parents since we were kids saw a picture of me with my children and said, "Billy, you look just like the way I remember your father from our childhood." So I guess I have more of my father to look like as well. Sophie, Pop and I were close, but we lived in different parts of the country, and we only talked every couple of weeks. Sophie was my pal, my constant companion, our family roommate. Losing her ached on a daily basis. I was surrounded by reminders of her. 16 years have now passed since that time when I lost my dad and my dog during a career high point. Like the Clintons, a few months later, we got another mutt, another puppy, a timid, neurotic rescue mutt named Montana, who was scared of people, scared of dogs, scared of walking down the sidewalk. But we lavished her with unconditional love and affection, and that's how we kept Sophie in our hearts. Thank you. Thanks. For those of you who know me as a writer, this is a whole new thing for me, not being able to read the stories. The story I just told is from my book, which is called Showdown at Shinagawa. There's actually a huge poster over here. Showdown at Shinagawa, Tales of, what is it? Tales of Filming from Bombay to Brazil. We have a few copies available if you want to see the handsome guy at the door. And he's holding it. Oh, yeah. Once there was an old woman who lived in a kingdom, and she had a grown son, and her son was a good lad. He was neither handsome nor rich, but he was witty and glib and full of words, and he worked very hard, and he gave his mother all the money that he earned. The two of them worked their fingers to the bone, and lived in a hovel, and no matter how hard they worked, they couldn't escape poverty. One day the old woman was in the marketplace, and she heard of a challenge that the king had issued some time before. The king had challenged all the young men of the kingdom to come before him and tell 7 lies in 7 consecutive days. And whoever could present the king 7 lies, and the king and his courtiers would judge them as they had to be either amusing or imaginative or convincing. And any young man who could do that 7 days in a row would win the hand of the daughter of the king in marriage. Now the old woman went home and she told her son about it, and he said, "Mother, this could be our opportunity. No matter how hard we work, we can't break out of this horrible poverty. please go before the king and tell him I wish to undertake the challenge of the 7 lives. So the old woman went back to the market, and she crossed to the palace, and she stood in front of the palace, and she walked back and forth, but she was too timid to approach the king. Finally, a kindly guard said, "Auntie, what is it? You come here, you walk for hours, you look like you have business, but you don't approach." And she told the king about her son. She told the guard about her son, and he led her before the king. And the king said, "What is it, woman? What do you wish from me?" And the woman said, "Your Majesty, my son is a wonderful man, but he's neither handsome nor rich. He's witty and glib and full of words, and he wishes to undertake the challenge of the 7 lives. Bring him before me." So the next day the young man went to see the king, and he was ushered into the presence. And before the king could say a word, the young man said, "Your Majesty, when my father was alive, one day he bought a cow, and as he led the cow home, the cow was so full of milk that the milk leaked from the udders, and the milk mixed with the dirt on the road and created mud that was 1 foot thick and 1 mile long." And the courtier said, "Oh, highly amusing, very imaginative." And one said, "I don't think it's convincing, but certainly it meets the other criteria." And the king was pleased. On the second day, the young man came before the king and he said, "Your Majesty, the cow that my father bought had so much milk that my mother had to milk the cow 12 times a day. And she made a favorite dish for our family. It was a hot rice and milk dish. One night she made the hot rice and milk dish, and my father didn't come home for dinner. So we ate without him. And my mother took the hot rice and milk dish and wrapped it up and put it aside for my father's return. Now, as it happened, my father was on a trip to a faraway place and did not come home for 2 years. But when he came home, my mother unwrapped the hot rice and milk dish, and the rice had sprouted and grown leaves 2 feet long, and the milk was still so hot that it burned my father's tongue." Well, the king and his courtiers all laughed. It was clearly amusing and imaginative. No one really was convinced by it, but that worked. On the third day, the young man came to the palace and came into the presence of the king, and he said, "Your Majesty, my father once bought 2 huge bags full of sesame seeds, and he wanted to bring them home to our little farm and plant them. But he had to cross a river to get to our farm, and he had neither horse nor boat. So being an ingenious man, he had a length of rope, and he sat down at the edge of the river, and he took each sesame seed and tied it to a rock with the rope. And then he threw all the rocks to the other side of the river, swam across himself, dried off his clothing, untied all the sesame seeds, put them back in the sack, and brought them home to plant." Well, the king and his advisors thought this was very clever as well. On the 4th day, the young man came before the king, and he said, "Your Majesty, my father took all the sesame seeds that he had rescued, and he planted them on our small farm, and they grew and grew and grew into enormous sesame trees, and the sesame trees bore sesame fruit, and my father harvested all the sesame fruit and put them in 4 enormous sacks to take to market. But to get to market, he had to cross back over the same river, and he had neither horse nor boat. So my father, because we had chickens in those days, my father took the largest hen from the chicken yard, and he tied the 4 huge sacks full of sesame fruit to the back of one of the hens. And the hen swam across the river. My father swam after him, dried off his own clothes, and then took the 4 sacks from the back of the hen and carried them to market. Well, the king was very amused, and clearly it was imaginative. And one of the courtiers said, "Not convincing, but amusing, imaginative." On the 5th day, the young man came before the king, and he said, "Your Majesty, as I said, we had chickens, and one day my father ran over one of the chickens with his cart in our yard, and it created a huge hole in the chicken's back. Now my father was a kind man, and he took the chicken and he laid it down very gently in the hen house. And there sprouted from the back of the chicken a tree that grew and grew and grew until it took up all the space in the hen house, and no one could go inside or out." The king and his courtiers were very pleased because it was such a bald-faced lie. "Fine, young man, that's fine." On the 6th day, the young man came before the king, and he said, "Your Majesty, My father, when he was away at the faraway place, he bought some farmland there, and he spent the last of his money on wheat seed. Then he realized he had no money to get home, so he sold the wheat seed secretly. But because he didn't wish to appear as a pauper in front of his new neighbors, when no one was looking, he went out into the road and took a basket and gathered a basket full of dirt. And then he sowed the dirt on his field while all his neighbors were watching, as if he was planting wheat seed. And he used the money that he had left over to get back to our family. 1 year later, a traveler from that faraway place came to see my father and told him that the wheat seed he had planted there had grown up very, very tall, and that it had borne the greatest yield of any wheat field in the kingdom. Very clever young man, very amusing, very imaginative. Not convincing, but clever. After the sixth lie, the young man went home, and his mother said to him, "My son, I fear for your life." What's wrong? Well, I've learned that the king has never accepted the challenge results from any of the young men who have tried it, and that on the seventh day, he always rejects the seventh day lie. And the young men who have tried the challenge before you have all disappeared. And I fear the king has taken their lives. You must flee, my son. You must flee the kingdom and go to another place. And the young man said, "Mother, I have a plan. You must trust me, but I need money. Please give me all of your money." And the young man was so trustworthy, and his mother loved him so much that she gave him all of her money. And he went to the marketplace, and he bought 7 huge jugs, big earthenware jugs. And the next day he went to the palace, and he dragged the jugs with him, and he set them up in the courtyard. And the king and his courtiers came out. And the king said, "What is this, young man?" And the young man looked directly at the king, and he said, "Your Majesty, your father and my father were brothers. Their father, our grandfather, had a great fortune, 14 jugs of gold and silver and precious jewels. When our grandfather died, he left the entire fortune to our fathers. Your father, being older and more cunning, killed my father and kept the entire fortune for himself. Now, if you believe this to be a lie, you must grant me the hand of your daughter in marriage. But if you believe this to be true, then the only fair thing you can do is to give me half of your fortune." The courtiers thought this was quite amazing, quite amusing, and quite imaginative. But the king was very worried. He looked shocked. He looked at the young man, and he looked at the courtiers laughing around him. And he closed his eyes and he thought, "It almost sounds convincing. And what happens to my reputation and the reputation of my family and my royal house if anyone actually believes this to be true? And besides that, if I fill his 7 jugs with gold and silver and precious jewels, there'll be very little left for me." And he closed his eyes and thought for a minute. Then he opened his eyes and he looked at the heavens and he said, "It's a lie!" And the servants of the king came and led the young man away and bathed him and clothed him. And he did, in fact, marry the daughter of the king. And they lived happily ever after. And the young man was free to be witty and glib and full of words and tell tales and spin stories to the end of his days. And he never told another lie again. Thank you. Do I believe it? It's true. "20 years ago this summer, my wife Susan and I took our kids to Europe. We decided it would be a fun trip, and we went to England and France for about 3 weeks. And we really had a terrific time. traveling together. We had made some great memories and had some wonderful experiences. But there was definitely a point at which it became painfully obvious that the kids didn't always want to do what the adults wanted to do. One big bone of convention was cathedrals. Why do we have to go to so many churches, said my son Danny. We're not even Christians. Well, we've been through England and we've gone to Salisbury Cathedral and we've been to Westminster Abbey and we got to France and we immediately dragged them off to Notre Dame. That didn't help. But there was one more church that I wanted to take them to. In the summer of 1968, 30 years before, I'd been to Chartres Cathedral. Chartres, but my French accent is as bad as Bill Clinton's. Chartres Cathedral, about an hour outside of Paris. And I was there with my college roommate in '68. And we were very impressed by the young British scholar who led all the English language tours. And when we got to Paris in 1998 with my family, I read in a guidebook that the same man, Malcolm Miller, was still doing the English language tours at Chartres. And I remembered him, his brilliance from 30 years before. And so we hopped on a train to Chartres. And we walked to the cathedral. And when we got there, we met the English language tour at the north porch of the cathedral. Now the north porch is an enormous multi-doored entrance surrounded by sculpture. And the tour guide was the same man. It was Malcolm Miller. And what we noticed in '68 was that you could take his morning tour and his afternoon tour and learn completely different things because Chartres had so much art and so much beauty and the man had such an amazing brain that he never repeated the same thing twice. And he said, how many of you have taken my tour before? And a lady in the front said, I was here this morning, Mr. Miller. And another guy said, I was here 2 years ago. And I waved from the back and I said, 30 years ago this month. He said, yes, I remember you, sir, but you didn't have gray hair then. And he told us about the sculptures on the north porch that surround this amazing multi-doored arch doorway. Talking about the sculptures that particularly pertain to early in the book of Genesis, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And he said, and here you see Eve is standing by a tree, and by gosh, she's naked. And here's Adam sleeping in front of a different tree, and oh my goodness, he's naked too. And if you remember the story, the snake gets Eve to eat the apple, and from that moment forward, Adam and Eve become very self-conscious about their nudity, and they devise clothing. And that's the end of nudism in the Bible, as far as I know. Now, he took us around to the front entrance of the cathedral, the royal portal, the main entrance, under one of the 3 fabulous rose windows at Chartres. And he led us into the nave of the cathedral, and we walked around the labyrinth that's set in stone in the floor. And then he sat us down, and he started to tell us about the cathedral. He explained that there are 176 intact stained glass windows at Chartres. It had escaped the ravages of World War I and World War II, when so many church windows had been blown out and so many churches had been destroyed. In 1939, the powers that be had removed the glass from all 176 windows and stored it in a safe place till the end of the war, and then restored it after the war. He explained that a lot of the stained glass windows were Bible stories. They were like cartoons made to teach Bible stories to illiterate peasants. And the window directly behind him, we were sitting in the pews facing the altar, and he had his back to the altar. And the window directly behind him was called the Incarnation window. This one. And in the Incarnation window, he said, and here we see the angel Gabriel announcing to the Virgin Mary that she will give birth to our Lord. And my goodness, she looked surprised. Wouldn't you be surprised as well? And I was glorying in the beauty of this place and returning to a place that I remembered fondly, and it met all my memories and expectations. And I looked over at my family, and Susan and I had realized when the kids complained about churches that places like this that were magnificent glimpses into medieval history and iconic for us, for the kids were creepy, dark places full of dead people. And I looked at my family, and my older boy, Razi, who was 14 at the time, was looking interested. And I looked at Danny, and he had that creepy old church look on his face. And I looked at Susan, and she had a big smile on her face, and she was looking and looking up, and I followed her gaze, and I looked up and up and up, and I was swept up by the sheer verticality of the place. And I looked at the clear story windows up at the top, and the sun streaming in through there and shafting down the stone walls, and I marveled at how could anyone build this 800 years ago without modern building techniques, something so huge and glorious and beautiful, without steel, without superstructures and support. And I thought to myself, no, we're not Christians, but surely there was some God up there in the play of the light through the windows. And then I heard Mr. Miller falter in his delivery, and I looked down at him, and he was looking at our group, and people were clearly not paying attention, and there was murmuring in our group. And he was looking around, and I looked past him, and I saw standing there on the altar at Chartres, was a pretty young blonde woman wearing a bright red dress. And as I watched, she stood there with her legs spread and her arms out, staring up at the heavens and undulating in some personal ecstasy that I couldn't relate to or duplicate at this moment. And as she stared up there, as we watched, she flung her arms up, and the red dress fell to the floor. She was naked. She was as naked as Eve in the Garden of Eden. Mr. Miller said, "Oh dear." And he disappeared out a side door of the cathedral. For a few moments there was complete silence. There were hundreds of people in Chartres Cathedral that day. Various tour groups, including ours, tourists from all over the world. And for a few seconds there was silence. And then there was pandemonium. We heard the click of cameras and saw the flashes and flashes. Belgian schoolboys jockeyed for camera positions with Asian tourists. A group of Danish nuns stood to one side and watched very carefully, but they took no photo. My first thought was, I have a video camera here in my backpack. And I put my hand in there to draw it out, and I thought, do I want to be that guy? That guy who takes video shots of naked babes in cathedrals in front of his children? And I thought, well, I could just look. Maybe I can get some idea of what's going on. I don't have to shoot anything. I don't want naked bodies on our summer travel movie. And I thought, no, that's just as bad. And I let go of the camera. Now, several long minutes later, Mr. Miller returned, accompanied by an elderly security guard. And the guard walked over to the young blonde woman who had stopped undulating and was just standing there looking dazed. And he took off his jacket and he wrapped it gently around her, and he started to lead her away. And she stopped, picked up the red dress, held it to her, and he took her out the side door. Now, Mr. Miller was a trooper, and he wanted to get our group's attention and tell us about Chartres. And people went, "Wait a minute! What was that all about?" He said, "Oh, some troubled soul, I imagine." Well, is she going to get in trouble? Will she be arrested? Is she going to jail? He said, "No, I expect she'll be dealt with kindly." And he did finally get our attention back, and he did tell us more about Chartres, and we did have a terrific tour. But I began to wonder if overwhelmingly huge and beautiful and iconic places like Chartres Cathedral tended to attract examples of bizarre behavior like this. As a San Franciscan, I knew that the Golden Gate Bridge, the beautiful side facing the city and the bay, attracted people who wanted to end their own lives, and I just wondered if there was any kind of equivalence. Now the tour ended, it was a very hot and muggy day, and we started to walk back to the train. And on the way we talked about our theories. I had the most cynical view of all. I said, clearly that was a setup for a photo shoot. some sleazy skin mag, some men's magazine, wanted to get shots of naked babes in churches, and they knew the security at Chartres was light, and so they sent her out. And one of those people in the cathedral there was her photographer and was getting a lot of snaps. Susan didn't really have a theory as to what had happened, but she hoped that the woman would be treated kindly. And she also said, you know, it almost seemed, in a way, they didn't really seem surprised. Maybe they knew her. Maybe this had happened before. The kids had a lot of theories. Oh, that woman was high on drugs. Oh, she was probably crazy. She was from a mental institution. And as we got back to the train, we realized that we probably wouldn't ever really know what that was all about. And I found myself dozing on the train on the way back to Paris. And I was thinking, maybe I could have gotten some clues with the video camera. But someday, I know, I'll be traveling the world, and I'll walk up to a newsstand, and I'll see some sleazy skin magazine, Bone Appetite magazine. And there would be a cover spread that says, Charlotte does shark. I'm still looking. Okay, we're going to take a break. If you don't have a seat, there are several people who've been really rowdy. We're going to kick them out. Come have a nosh, have a drink. We'll be back in about 15 minutes before. Thanks so much.